She woke up before dawn, as she had every day of her life, to the sound of roosters crowing and the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. The small house she lived in was quiet except for the soft creaking of the old wooden floors and the occasional clatter of dishes in the kitchen. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to keep the cold from creeping under her skin. Outside, the village was beginning to stir. Men heading to the fields, women gathering water from the wells, children running barefoot across the dusty paths. Life moved slowly here, dictated by long-standing customs and rules that seemed impossible to escape. From the moment she had learned to speak, she had been taught her role: obey, serve, and prepare for the day she would marry. Her parents spoke of marriage like it was the most important achievement a girl could have, but she felt a restlessness inside her, a quiet, persistent longing for something different, something beyond the narrow paths of her village. She had always wondered what it would feel like to make her own choices, to walk freely through the world without fear of judgment or punishment. But those thoughts were dangerous. In her village, questioning the rules or resisting the expectations placed upon her could lead to severe consequences. Families were respected or feared based on their adherence to tradition.
Any sign of rebellion could bring shame not only to her but also to her parents and relatives.
She had seen what happened to girls who dared to resist. They were scolded, isolated, and sometimes punished. That knowledge weighed heavily on her heart, yet it could not extinguish the spark of hope that grew brighter every day. The problem that had begun to consume her thoughts recently was marriage. Her parents had chosen a suitor for her, a man from a nearby village known for his wealth and connections. According to her parents, he was ideal, a match that would secure their family's standing and honor. But she had met him only once, and even in that brief encounter, she had felt a coldness in his eyes, a lack of understanding or respect for who she truly was. She did not love him, and she could not imagine spending her life in his company. The more she resisted, the more her family grew frustrated. At first, it was quiet reminders and hints, questions about when she would prepare herself, suggestions that she should think of the family's reputation, gentle scoldings disguised as concern. But these soon escalated. Doors were locked, visits were monitored, and every step she took was watched. The village, once full of small freedoms like walking to the well or tending to her modest garden, became a prison with invisible walls. One afternoon, when the sun was high and the air heavy with heat, her parents confronted her. Their voices were stern, shaking with anger and fear. "You will marry him," her father said. "This is not your choice. You will obey, or there will be consequences." Her mother's eyes were filled with tears, but not of sorrow. They were tears of frustration at the challenge she posed. "We only want what is best for you," her mother added, though her words rang hollow in the young woman's ears. "I cannot marry him," she said firmly, her voice quivering not from fear, but from the weight of the moment.
"I will not live a life that is not mine."
"I want to choose my own path." Her refusal changed everything. That night, her parents did something she could never have imagined. In an act of desperation and control, they chained her in her own home, a symbol of the boundaries they believed should never be crossed. The cold metal bit into her wrists, and the heavy links clinked each time she moved. It was meant to break her will, to remind her of the futility of resisting. She sat on the hard floor, feeling the sharp press of metal and the hopelessness of her situation, but inside her spirit refused to bend. Days passed in silence and tension. She learned to measure her movements carefully, to avoid straining the chains too much and to conserve her energy. The village outside went about its usual business, unaware or perhaps unwilling to intervene in the private affairs of her home. Occasionally, a neighbor would glance toward the house, but fear or respect for her parents kept them from speaking. Inside, the young woman's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and dreams. She imagined escaping, running across fields and hills, breathing in air that was not burdened by fear or expectation. She began to notice the smallest details around her, seeking clues and opportunities. The old wooden floorboards, the loose latch on a window, the times when her parents were occupied elsewhere, all became part of her quiet planning. Even in chains, she refused to surrender to despair. She read books quietly, studied the stars through the small window above her bed, and remembered stories of people who had changed their lives despite overwhelming obstacles. Each story was a spark, a tiny flame that kept hope alive. Her physical confinement did not stop her imagination. She dreamt of mountains, rivers, and open skies, of traveling to places where a person could speak freely, learn, and grow without fear of punishment. These dreams became more than fantasies. They became goals, silent promises she made to herself that she would find a way to freedom, no matter the risk. The village, too, seemed to take notice in subtle ways. There were strangers passing through occasionally, traders and travelers who brought news of the outside world. She listened to their stories, absorbing information about towns, rivers, and roads. Each piece of knowledge became a small tool for her eventual escape, even if she could not yet see the full path ahead. Despite the harshness of her confinement, she remained determined to hold on to her dignity and self-respect. She refused to beg or plead, even when hunger or exhaustion gnawed at her body. Instead, she focused on the small victories: a moment of calm in the sun, a fleeting memory of freedom, a quiet laugh at something she remembered from childhood. These small acts were her rebellion, invisible but powerful. Evenings were the hardest. The house grew cold, the shadows long and oppressive, and the chains seemed heavier in the dim light. She would sit by the window, listening to the distant sounds of life continuing outside her prison. Children's laughter, the clatter of carts on dusty roads, the faint music from village gatherings all reminded her of what was missing from her life. Yet she did not despair. Each night she planned and dreamed, silently promising herself that one day she would leave this place behind. Her parents, growing more frustrated with each day of her resistance, became stricter. They tried reasoning, pleading, and eventually intimidation. But their actions only reinforced her resolve. She had seen what submission brought to other girls: a life of obedience, quiet suffering, and lost dreams. She had decided that her life would not follow that path. She refused to be a shadow in someone else's story. As the sun set over the village, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she sat quietly, chains cold against her skin, heart heavy but unyielding. She did not know what the future held, nor how she would escape, but she understood one thing clearly: freedom was worth any risk, and no chain, no matter how strong, could contain the fire of her spirit. In the silence of the night, as stars began to twinkle faintly above the rooftops, she whispered a promise to herself. One day she would walk beyond the hills, beyond the fields, beyond the control of those who sought to dictate her life. One day she would be free, and until that day came, she would endure, plan, and wait, knowing that even in chains, her heart and mind were already walking toward the horizon. The village had always been quiet, almost sleepy, with its narrow dirt roads, small stone houses, and the distant lowing of cattle. But that summer, something unusual stirred among the villagers. A stranger had arrived, a man from the west, tall and strong, with a calm yet confident presence. He was a rancher, traveling through the area to check on some trade and to purchase supplies for his ranch back home. People whispered about him, curious and cautious at the same time. They had never seen someone move with such ease and authority, yet he carried himself without arrogance. The young woman noticed him first from her small window, peering out when no one was watching. He did not seem to notice her, which made her heart skip a little with hope. Here was someone from the outside world, someone who did not yet know her village's strict rules or the chains that bound her. Perhaps he could be a key, even unknowingly, to the freedom she longed for. The rancher's first days in the village were uneventful, but he was observant. He walked through the markets, helped carry heavy sacks for villagers, and spoke politely to anyone who met him. Slowly he began to notice things that others ignored: the subtle signs of hardship in certain homes, the way some girls avoided eye contact with adults, and the way fear seemed to fill the rooms where strict families lived. It was not long before he noticed her house, small and worn, with windows that seemed shuttered not only against the sun but against the world. There was a tension in the air that made him uneasy, something unspoken but heavy. One afternoon, as he passed by her home carrying a basket of goods, he saw her briefly, peeking through the small window. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that instant he sensed a quiet strength, even though there was fear in her gaze. Something about her presence struck him, an air of dignity and resilience despite obvious suffering. Most villagers might have ignored the signs, thinking it was none of their business, but he could not. His instincts told him that she was trapped in more than just the physical sense. He began to find small ways to help, careful not to draw attention or provoke the family. He would leave extra supplies outside the door: fresh bread, a jug of milk, warm blankets on cold mornings. She noticed these small gestures immediately. Each gift was a message. Someone cared, someone saw her struggle, and someone respected her, even without words. It gave her hope that perhaps one day she could find a way to escape the chains that bound her body and her spirit. Their first real conversation happened by accident. One evening, the rancher returned to the market to fetch more supplies. He saw her running a small errand for her family, carrying a basket of vegetables. The chain on her wrist was hidden beneath a sleeve, but the way she moved carefully and deliberately revealed the struggle beneath. He approached her slowly, keeping his voice low. "You're strong," he said simply, noticing the determination in her eyes. "Even in difficult times, you carry yourself with courage." She looked at him cautiously, unsure if she could trust anyone. But there was something in his voice, a calm sincerity that made her hesitate before turning away. "I thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She had never spoken like this to anyone outside her family. The rancher nodded, respecting her silence, and walked away without pressing further. Over the following days, their encounters became more frequent, always brief and cautious. He learned more about her situation through observation rather than direct questions, careful not to put her at risk. He noticed the locked doors, the way neighbors avoided even making eye contact, and the small details of her movements that revealed her confinement. At night, he would think about her quietly, wondering how someone so young could endure such treatment without losing hope. For her part, the young woman was torn. She had been trained to trust no one outside her family, yet she felt a cautious connection to the rancher. He did not speak down to her, he did not demand obedience, and he did not judge her for the circumstances in which she lived. In him, she saw a glimpse of a world beyond chains and rules, a world where people could make their own choices and live with dignity. Their trust grew slowly, like a fragile plant sprouting in the shade. She learned to recognize him from afar, and he learned to notice her signals, subtle gestures of distress, fleeting moments of hope, and the quiet determination that never left her face. They never discussed escape openly at first. The very act of planning would have been too dangerous. Instead, they built a silent understanding, a shared knowledge that he would help if the moment came, and that she would survive until it did. The rancher also noticed the fear that lingered around her family. Her parents were strict and controlling, enforcing their rules with quiet intimidation. He saw how their neighbors obeyed them, how even a small act of rebellion could bring harsh consequences. This awareness made him cautious. He could not simply take her away without careful planning. The rules of the village were rigid, and breaking them could bring trouble not just to him but to her as well. Yet the injustice burned in him and he could not ignore it. One evening he left a basket of fresh bread and vegetables outside her door, carefully watching from a distance. When she peeked out, she found a small note tucked inside. "You deserve to be free. Do not lose hope." Her hands shook as she held the note close to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling that someone cared. It was the first time she had felt that someone outside her family recognized her humanity. That night she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the rancher and his kindness. She began to imagine what life might be like if she could escape, if she could leave the chains behind and walk freely through fields and forests, across rivers and hills, under the open sky. For the first time, freedom seemed tangible, not just a dream. The rancher, too, thought about her constantly. He could not ignore the injustice he had seen, and he felt a growing responsibility to act. Yet he was careful. Any wrong move could put her in more danger, and he needed a plan that would ensure her safety. He began to study the village, learning the routines, the times when her parents were away, and the paths that led out of the area. Every detail mattered. As the days passed, their quiet bond grew stronger. She began to trust him, speaking in whispers when no one could hear, sharing small details about her life, her dreams, and the longing for freedom. He listened without judgment, offering advice when he could and always showing patience. In him, she saw not just a helper, but someone who believed in her strength and her right to live her life as she chose. At the same time, the tension in her home remained high. Her parents grew angrier with each day she resisted their chosen path. Their frustration manifested in shouting, threats, and stricter confinement. But even as the chains remained, she felt a sense of power in her growing connection with the rancher. It was subtle, quiet, but undeniable, a reminder that she was not alone, and that there were people in the world who could see her for who she truly was. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the village, the rancher passed her house and noticed her standing near the window, looking out at the horizon. She caught his eye and gave a small nod, barely noticeable but enough for him to understand her silent message. Hope was alive in her gaze. Courage was alive in her stance. And for the rancher, that small gesture was enough to strengthen his resolve. He would find a way to help her, no matter how difficult it might be. The young woman spent that night imagining the possibilities, the places she could go, and the life she could lead if she were free. Each thought brought a mix of excitement and fear, but fear no longer paralyzed her. It became a guide reminding her to move carefully, to observe and to plan. She understood that her freedom would not come easily, but she was ready to endure, to wait, and to act when the moment was right. And in the quiet of the night, as stars began to twinkle over the village, both of them, she in her small chained room, and he in his modest lodging, dreamed of a future where chains no longer bound anyone. The rancher imagined guiding her safely to a life of freedom, and she imagined finally stepping out into the open world, her spirit soaring at last. Though they had not yet spoken the words, a silent promise was forming between them, a promise of courage, trust, and the hope that one day she would walk free. The days in the village grew hotter as summer pressed on, and the young woman's resolve to escape became stronger with every passing moment. Life in her home was still strict, and the chains on her wrists were a constant reminder of the control her family held over her. Yet the small gestures from the rancher, the baskets of food, the notes of encouragement, and the understanding glances, kept a flicker of hope alive in her heart. Each encounter, no matter how brief, made her believe that freedom was possible. The rancher, too, felt a growing urgency. He could see that the longer she remained trapped, the more difficult it would be for her to break free. But the path to helping her was filled with obstacles. Her parents were cautious and controlling, the village was small and watchful, and the laws of the region frowned upon interfering in family matters. Any misstep could put both of them in danger. He realized that to help her he would need a careful plan, patience, and most importantly, her trust. Their communication began to grow more deliberate, though still secretive. The young woman would pass small notes through the window or under the door when her parents were distracted. In these notes, she shared her thoughts, her fears, and her hopes for the future. The rancher responded in the same quiet way, giving advice, offering strategies, and reminding her that she was strong and capable. Each note was a small thread, weaving a connection that was both practical and emotional. She began to think more strategically. The chains that bound her were heavy, but she learned to move within their limits. She observed her parents' routines, noting the times when they were busiest or when their attention was elsewhere. She memorized the layout of the house and the surrounding paths, imagining which routes might be safest if she were ever able to leave. Every small detail mattered, even the behavior of the neighbors, the presence of roaming animals, and the positions of fences became pieces of a complex puzzle she needed to solve. One evening, the rancher brought her a small folded map, carefully hidden inside a basket of bread and vegetables. When she opened it, she saw the village sketched out, the surrounding fields, the river to the east, and the forested hills beyond. He had marked safe paths, places to hide, and areas that were patrolled less often. The young woman's heart raced as she studied the map. It was more than a drawing. It was a key, a glimpse of the world outside the chains, a promise that escape was possible. They began to plan more openly, though still cautiously. Words were chosen carefully, ideas shared in whispers or written on scraps of paper. They discussed timing, routes, and possible obstacles. She expressed her fears. The fear of being caught, the fear of the unknown, and the fear of leaving everything familiar behind. He listened patiently, never dismissing her concerns, and offered reassurance without pressure. "You are stronger than you know," he told her one night. "Every step we take will be careful. and I will not let anything happen to you." The young woman realized that escape was not just about breaking chains. It was about understanding her environment, learning how to navigate it, and preparing mentally and emotionally for life beyond the village. She practiced moving quietly, listening for sounds that could indicate danger and noticing details that others overlooked. She even began to learn small survival skills from the rancher: how to read the terrain, find water, and identify safe places to rest. Each lesson was a small victory, a preparation for the freedom she longed for. Meanwhile, tension in her home continued to grow. Her parents were suspicious, noticing small signs that something was changing. They demanded obedience, monitored her closely, and became harsher with each day of resistance. The young woman had to balance her desire to escape with the need to avoid arousing suspicion. Every conversation, every movement, and every glance had to be calculated. She felt the weight of danger pressing down on her, but it also strengthened her resolve. As the plan took shape, they began to set a tentative timeline. They decided on a night when the village would be most distracted, during a local festival when people would be celebrating and streets would be crowded. The rancher would help her navigate past the guards, through the fields, and toward the safe paths he had marked on the map. They discussed contingencies, preparing for the unexpected, and reinforcing their commitment to move only when both were ready. The young woman also began to imagine what life could be like after escape. She pictured herself running through open fields, feeling the wind on her face and looking at stars without fear of judgment or punishment. She dreamed of choosing her own home, learning new skills, and meeting people who respected her for who she was. Each dream gave her strength, reminding her that the risk was worth it. Freedom was not just a desire, it was a goal, and she was determined to reach it. The rancher noticed her growing courage and resilience. He admired her intelligence, her careful planning, and the way she never lost hope despite the chains and threats around her. Their bond deepened, not through romantic gestures, but through mutual respect, trust, and shared purpose. He knew that helping her was not just a matter of logistics. It was also about emotional support. She needed to believe in herself as much as he needed to act as her guide. Days turned into weeks, and every small action became part of a larger plan. The young woman memorized the positions of her parents' guards, learned when the neighbors would be most distracted, and practiced moving silently within the chain's limits. The rancher refined the map, adding notes about water sources, hiding spots, and safe distances. They discussed signals and codes, ways to communicate without alerting anyone. Each preparation was meticulous but necessary. Every detail could mean the difference between freedom and capture. Despite the careful planning, fear was always present. She worried about being caught, about the unknown that awaited her beyond the village, and about the consequences if something went wrong. The rancher shared his own concerns, acknowledging the risks and reinforcing the need for caution. They spoke about courage, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. This conversation strengthened her resolve, reminding her that fear could be a guide rather than a barrier. One night, as they reviewed the plan, the young woman felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The chains on her wrists were heavy, but her heart felt lighter with the knowledge that someone believed in her. The rancher assured her that the plan was as safe as possible and that he would remain by her side every step of the way. She nodded, silently promising herself that she would not turn back. The risk was high, but the reward, freedom, was worth everything. The final preparations involved subtle training. She practiced moving silently, listening for sounds and reading the terrain. She learned to carry small items that might be useful and to conserve energy for the long journey ahead. They rehearsed signals, escape routes, and timing, building confidence in each other's abilities. Every practice made the plan more concrete, and every success strengthened their trust. The village remained unaware of the quiet but determined planning taking place within its boundaries. People continued with their routines, oblivious to the young woman's growing strength and the rancher's careful guidance. The chains were still present, but they had lost much of their power over her spirit. She was no longer just a girl trapped in a house. She was a strategist, a planner, and a dreamer ready to take control of her own life. As the festival approached, the moment they had chosen for her escape, the young woman felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She knew the risks were high, But she also knew that she could no longer remain in chains, both physical and emotional. The rancher reminded her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. This wisdom became her anchor as they prepared for the most important night of her life. In the quiet of her room, she imagined the open fields, the river, and the hills beyond the village. She imagined the sound of her own footsteps on soft earth, the wind in her hair, and the feeling of true freedom. Every detail fueled her determination. She had spent weeks planning, preparing, and imagining this moment, and now it was close. The chains on her wrists felt heavier than ever, but they could no longer contain her mind or her heart. And so, as the sun set over the village, casting long shadows across the narrow streets, the young woman and the rancher felt the tension and hope that came before action. They had prepared, practiced, and planned. They had built trust and courage. And now, the night that could change everything was approaching. Freedom was no longer a distant dream. It was within reach, waiting just beyond the horizon. The night had arrived, the night they had planned for weeks. The village was alive with celebration, as the festival filled the streets with music, laughter, and dancing. Lanterns flickered from every doorway, casting playful shadows along the dusty roads. The sounds of drums, singing, and the chatter of villagers created the perfect cover for what was about to happen. The young woman sat in her small, dimly lit room, chains still around her wrists but her heart pounding with anticipation. Every sound outside reminded her that freedom was within reach. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold metal of the chains against her skin. It was heavy, uncomfortable, and meant to control her, but tonight it could not stop her. She had prepared for this moment, practiced her movements, and memorized the safest paths. The rancher was waiting nearby, blending into the shadows, ready to guide her through the darkness to safety. She glanced at the map one last time, tracing the route in her mind, and whispered to herself, "I will be free." The first step was always the hardest. She waited until the noise of the festival reached a peak, the villagers laughing and dancing, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding in one of their homes. Then, with careful precision, she slid the chains to the side, moving slowly to avoid making any noise. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from the sheer intensity of the moment. The chains rattled faintly as she shifted them, and her stomach tightened. One wrong sound, one glance from a neighbor could ruin everything. The rancher appeared as if from nowhere, his presence calm and steady. "Are you ready?" he whispered. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and took her first careful step toward the door. Every movement had been planned. The timing of their steps, the direction they would take, and the moments they would pause to listen. The rancher led, alert to every sound, every shadow, every movement that could signal danger. They moved through the village streets like ghosts, taking advantage of the crowded festival to blend in with the people. Lanterns bobbed above them, music echoed from every corner, and the laughter of villagers provided a cover for the faint sounds of their careful footsteps. Her heart raced, but her mind remained sharp, remembering every detail of the route they had planned. They slipped past houses, avoided well-trodden paths, and stuck to the shadows, their movements synchronized and deliberate. At one point, a villager nearly spotted them. A man carrying a basket of food glanced in their direction, frowning at the unusual movement in the shadows. The young woman froze, her breath catching, and the rancher pressed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. They waited, hearts pounding, until the man walked away, absorbed in his own tasks. Every small victory was a surge of hope, every near miss a test of their courage and skill. As they approached the edge of the village, the young woman felt a mixture of exhilaration and fear. The houses grew sparser, the roads less crowded, and the festival sounds faded into the distance. She realized that once they passed the last streetlight, there would be no turning back. She took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill her lungs, and followed the rancher toward the fields beyond the village. The path led through tall grass and over small streams, the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves replacing the festival music. The young woman moved carefully, stepping over roots and stones, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. The rancher guided her, pointing out safe spots to rest and areas to avoid. Every detail mattered. One misstep could lead to injury, exposure, or being caught. They pressed on, silent except for the occasional whisper, moving as shadows in the moonlight. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. The young woman's muscles ached, and the chains, though loosened for the escape, still caused discomfort. But every step forward brought a sense of liberation, a feeling that had been absent her entire life. She could almost taste the freedom waiting beyond the hills, feel the wind on her face without restriction, and imagine the life she would build once the journey was complete. At one point, they paused by a small stream to rest. The rancher pointed out the faint tracks they should follow, ensuring they stayed on the safest path. "We're almost through the hardest part," he whispered, giving her a small, encouraging smile. She nodded, exhausted but determined, and drank water from the stream, feeling it revitalize her body and spirit. The night was quiet here, far from the village lights, and for the first time she felt a true sense of peace, even in the midst of danger. But danger was never far. In the distance, she heard the faint barking of dogs, guards' dogs patrolling the outskirts of the village. Her heart jumped and she froze, listening intently. The rancher motioned for her to stay low, crouching behind a clump of bushes. They waited, silent and tense, until the dogs wandered away, distracted by something else. Each moment of suspense heightened her awareness, her senses sharper than ever before. She realized how much she had learned about careful observation, timing, and patience. As they moved deeper into the fields, the first light of dawn began to tint the sky with pale gold and pink. The village was far behind them now, its rules, chains, and expectations no longer a barrier. The young woman could hardly believe it. She was truly free. The rancher guided her to a hidden path through the hills, a route that led toward the forested area where she could rest safely without fear of being seen. Every step forward was a triumph, a confirmation that courage and careful planning could overcome even the most oppressive circumstances. By mid-morning, they reached a small clearing in the woods. The young woman sank to the ground, exhausted but exhilarated. She looked around at the open sky, the rustling leaves, and the gentle sunlight filtering through the trees. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of ownership over her own body, her own choices, and her own future. The chains were gone, both literally and figuratively. She could move freely, think freely, and dream freely. The rancher sat beside her, equally relieved. "You did it," he said softly. "You were brave, careful, and determined. I only guided you. You did all the hard work." She smiled faintly, tears in her eyes, feeling a mix of gratitude, relief, and newfound strength. For the first time, she realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. They rested in the clearing, eating small portions of food the rancher had brought and drinking from a nearby stream. The young woman shared stories of her childhood, the restrictions she had endured, and the dreams she had once thought impossible. The rancher listened attentively, never interrupting, never judging, only offering encouragement. In that quiet moment, a deep trust had formed between them, built not just on the shared journey but on mutual respect and understanding. After a while, they began to plan the next steps. The journey to the west would be long and challenging, but they now had the advantage of distance, secrecy, and careful preparation. The young woman felt ready, knowing that she had already overcome the most difficult part, the first step toward freedom. The rest of the journey would require endurance, patience, and continued courage, but she no longer doubted her own strength. As the day progressed, they moved cautiously through the forest, following the hidden paths the rancher had mapped out. She learned to listen to the sounds of the forest, recognize signs of wildlife, and navigate natural obstacles. Every step was a lesson in independence, skill, and awareness. She realized that freedom was not just about leaving the village. It was about learning to live fully, responsibly, and bravely in the world beyond. By evening, they reached a safe spot near a small river, where they could rest overnight. The young woman lay down on the soft grass, exhausted but alive with the exhilaration of escape. The rancher tended to her carefully, ensuring she had water, food, and warmth. She looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of wonder she had never known. The world was vast, open, and waiting for her. For the first time, she believed that anything was possible. That night, as they slept under the open sky, the young woman dreamed of the future. Fields of green, mountains in the distance, and a life free from chains and fear. She dreamed of choosing her own path, making her own decisions, and building a life defined not by others but by herself. The rancher nearby kept watch quietly, ensuring their safety. Together they had crossed the threshold from oppression to freedom, from fear to hope, and from chains to possibility. By the time dawn broke, she was no longer the same girl who had been trapped in her home. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she had proven to herself that courage, careful planning, and trust could overcome even the greatest obstacles. And for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of true hope, a hope that would carry her across the hills, rivers, and forests toward the life she had always dreamed of. The young woman awoke to the gentle light of dawn, filtered through the trees by the river where she and the rancher had spent the night. She stretched her arms, feeling a freedom she had never known. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers, and for the first time she breathed deeply without fear of chains or confinement. The world was open, vast and alive with possibility. She looked over at the rancher, who was carefully packing their small supplies. He smiled at her quietly, a reminder that they had crossed a threshold few could imagine. Their journey westward had begun in earnest. The forest paths were challenging but offered cover from the village she had escaped. Every step tested her endurance, but she had grown stronger during her weeks of planning and careful preparation. She was learning not just to survive, but to thrive, and each day brought new lessons in resilience, courage, and independence. The rancher guided her patiently, showing her how to navigate rivers, recognize edible plants, and find safe spots to rest. She absorbed every word, every demonstration, knowing that her life now depended on her ability to adapt. The first days were the hardest. Her muscles ached from climbing hills, wading through streams, and walking long distances. Her skin was sunburned and her hands calloused, but she refused to complain. She had tasted freedom, and no discomfort could diminish the exhilaration of being able to choose her own path. The rancher noticed her determination and praised her small victories, reinforcing the confidence she was beginning to feel in herself. "You are stronger than you think," he told her one evening as they rested under a lone tree. She smiled, feeling a sense of pride she had never known. Along the way, they encountered small challenges, rivers that had to be crossed carefully, uneven terrain that threatened slips or falls, and the occasional wild animal. Each obstacle required careful planning and patience. The young woman had learned to observe the environment closely, watching the water flow, noticing the behavior of birds, and listening to the sounds of the forest. Every detail became a tool, and every step a small victory over the uncertainty of the journey. Beyond the physical challenges, there were emotional ones. She missed the life she had known despite its oppression. Memories of her family, friends, and familiar routines came unbidden, bringing a mixture of longing and sadness. She realized that freedom did not erase the past, nor did it remove the bonds of love she still felt for certain people. But she also understood that her life had changed forever, and that she had the power to shape her own future. Each reflection strengthened her resolve, reminding her why she had risked everything for independence. The rancher became more than a guide. He was a companion, a teacher, and a friend. They shared stories along the way, talking about life, dreams, and the possibilities that lay ahead. He never pressured her, never spoke down to her, and never treated her as someone who needed saving. Instead, he treated her as an equal, respecting her intelligence, courage, and determination. This respect helped her grow, giving her confidence not only in her own abilities but in the possibility of building a life based on trust and equality. As they moved further west, the landscape changed. Open plains replaced the dense forests, and the horizon stretched endlessly before them. The young woman felt a sense of awe at the vastness of the world, a world she could now explore freely. She ran occasionally across the tall grass, letting the wind whip through her hair, and laughed with a joy she had never experienced. It was a sound of liberation, a declaration that she was no longer a prisoner of rules and chains. Even in freedom, challenges remained. Food and water were not always easy to find. Weather conditions could be harsh, and they had to remain vigilant against dangers both natural and human. But the young woman had learned to approach these obstacles with patience and careful thought. Each difficulty became an opportunity to test her strength, apply what she had learned, and grow more self-reliant. The rancher encouraged this independence, always reinforcing that she was capable of handling challenges on her own. One evening, as the sun set in fiery oranges and purples over the plains, the young woman reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the chains, the locked doors, the constant fear in her parents' home. And now, sitting beside the rancher under the open sky, she realized that she had not only escaped physical captivity, but had also discovered her own inner strength. She was no longer a girl defined by the expectations of others. She was a woman who could make her own choices and shape her own destiny. Their journey also brought them to small settlements along the way. Here she saw people living freely, making their own choices and building lives based on hard work and mutual respect. These glimpses of independent life reinforced her determination and gave her ideas for her own future. She began to imagine a home she could call her own, a place where she could work, learn, and build relationships without fear or oppression. The thought of creating a life from her own choices filled her with excitement and purpose. Along the journey, the bond between the young woman and the rancher deepened. It was not a bond based on dependency but on mutual respect, trust, and shared experience. They supported each other through the challenges, celebrated small victories, and encouraged one another when doubts arose. For the young woman, the rancher became a symbol of the possibilities of life beyond the village. A life where kindness, courage, and equality were valued above control and tradition. As weeks turned into months, they continued their journey westward. They encountered new towns, diverse landscapes, and different cultures. Each experience was an opportunity for the young woman to learn, adapt, and grow. She discovered a love for exploring, a curiosity about the world, and a determination to build a life defined by her own choices. With every step, she felt more capable, more confident, and more alive. Eventually, they reached a region where the rancher's ranch lay, a wide expanse of land with rolling hills, pastures, and open skies. Here, the young woman could finally rest without fear, knowing she had reached a safe place where her life could truly begin. She looked out over the land, feeling a sense of peace and wonder. This was not just a physical destination. It was a symbol of her journey, her resilience, and the life she had fought to create. At the ranch, she began to learn new skills, tending to animals, managing crops, and understanding the rhythms of rural life. Each task was challenging but rewarding, giving her a sense of accomplishment and independence she had never known. The work was hard, but it was her own choice, and the satisfaction of shaping her life through effort and intelligence filled her with pride. The young woman also began to imagine her future in more concrete terms. She thought about the kind of home she wanted, the people she wanted to surround herself with, and the values she wanted to uphold. She realized that freedom was not only about escaping chains, but also about creating a life of purpose, respect, and joy. Every day she took small steps toward building that life, learning from the rancher, from the land, and from her own experiences. In time, she became an independent, capable woman, no longer defined by fear or oppression. She had escaped the chains of her village, faced countless challenges, and discovered her own strength and resilience. The rancher remained a steadfast companion, guiding when needed but always respecting her autonomy. Together they had crossed boundaries, faced dangers, and arrived in a place where life could be lived fully and freely. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the young woman reflected on her journey. She had endured confinement, fear, and strict control, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. She had discovered courage she did not know she possessed and learned that freedom was worth every risk. She understood now that life was not about following others' rules. It was about defining one's own path and having the courage to walk it. And so, with the vast West stretching before her, the young woman began her new life. She was no longer a girl chained to tradition and fear. She was a woman free to choose, free to explore, and free to dream. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities, and she faced them with confidence, strength, and hope. The chains were gone, but the lessons of courage, patience, and resilience stayed with her, guiding her through the life she had fought to claim. Her story, though beginning in fear and oppression, ended with triumph and possibility. She had proven that no chains, physical or societal, could suppress a determined spirit. And as she walked across the wide open fields, feeling the wind on her face and the sun warming her back, she knew one thing with certainty: the future belonged to her, and she would shape it with her own hands, heart, and mind.